Hey, Flynn. I don't know if you could see me. I don't know. I can see you though.
Hi, Julia. How are you doing?
I'm good. You ready for the shenanigans?
I am. So let me see who we have on.
I can't tell anything. I don't know what rights they've given you that I have not received yet because I can't see myself. I only see the screen, the black screen.
Yeah, I don't think it's yeah, that's all I can see too. I don't think it's up yet. So I think the election commissioner has a presentation. Is that? I think they have a presentation, but she can only stay for like 40 minutes or 45 minutes.
Oh.
So do you want to try to get as much testimony from her before we go to the other panelists? What do you think?
Yeah, so Neil called me yesterday and asked if we can have them go first.
Okay.
So you'll have to keep your remarks really short.
Okay.
And I'm just going to introduce the situation. We're not going to have colleagues do remarks until after the presentation so that we can dive right into their presentation, give an opportunity for our colleagues to ask questions.
Excuse me, counselors?
Yes.
Yep.
I don't mean to interrupt. I'm sorry. Do you have the presentation? Neil didn't send it to me. Do you have it? I'll text Neil, and so then that way I can send it to Candace, and I can send it to all of the counselors.
I
don't have it yet. Do either of you have it?
No, but I don't know.
No.
I don't know if Flynn's making things up because I don't know. Flynn, did you get an email about a presentation, or you just think that they got one? We need to. I don't know.
No, I didn't get anything. They didn't. Okay.
I know that they're testifying, but I'll text Neil to see if there's a PowerPoint or a deck or something.
Okay. Thanks, Christine.
Oh, you're welcome. No problem, counselors. I'm going to put myself back on mute.
And do I need to read? I'm going to read the public testimony that Singh Yang sent. Correct?
Well, you don't have to if you don't want to. You can just say that you received written testimony, and then it will be part of the written record.
And do I do that before we start with the show? I mean, do I do that at the beginning, or do I do that after?
You can do it as part of your opening statement if you'd like.
Okay. Yeah, Flynn, do you mind, only just because she was such an instrumental part of this, do you mind if I read it into the record?
No, not at all. That's appropriate. Thank you, Julia. Okay. I think that's great.
Yeah, and Julia, as the chair. Sorry.
Yeah, I'm Julia. I know you're going to give opening comments. I'm going to withhold mine because I'd rather get right into the testimony of the panel. Okay.
Yeah, but Flynn, at least you should say I'm calling this because it's important.
Oh yeah. Okay.
Just keep it like, just say why you decided to do it. If that would be, it would just be helpful since you're the sponsor of this.
Okay.
Just set some context as to why you decided to do it.
All right, I'll be very brief. I'll be like under 2 minutes.
Under 2 minutes? You mean you're gonna be 30 seconds, 90 seconds? That's quick. 2 minutes is not quick. I don't know what you're talking about. 2 minutes is quick. You're doing like 90 seconds, and if you go over, I'm gonna mute you.
Get the gavel out.
Oh yes, that's right. I'm gonna be like Bach up in here. All right. So I can never tell who's on who's on. So just I want to make sure that we're not live yet. Are we on? We're on the. Can everyone hear us?
We're not live at this time, but we'll be live in just a couple minutes.
Okay, good. Let us know so we act right.
I just got a text from Neil. So there's not a PowerPoint or a deck or anything. They're just going to give a verbal explanation of the recount process. The commissioner is just going to give a verbal explanation. So we're all set with that. There isn't another document to be sent out.
Perfect.
Okay. Thank you. Okay. Awesome. All right. So how do we let Tanya in? I believe she's trying to get in. Could someone let Tanya Tedesco in? Or do I need to do that?
I sent her the link,
Jacob
Counselor.
and I have been letting people into the
Okay.
Zoom meeting. There's no one trying to get in at this time.
Oh, okay. She's, can I get the Zoom? You sent her the Zoom, right, Jacob?
Yes, Counselor.
Okay, thank you. I'm excited for this one. Are you guys?
Yeah, I'm excited for it. And I think it'll be informative.
Counselors, we are live now, just so you're aware.
We are live. Excellent. So I'm going to see who is, I believe our panelists are Tanya Tedesco, Inette Tavares, Sabino Piemonte, and Cheryl Crawford. Those are our 4 panelists. And if someone could just give me word as to whether or not they're here. I see Tanya's in the house. Hey. I don't see Commissioner Tavares. And I don't see Cheryl Crawford. And if they're here, someone could just ping and let me know, that would be great. I'm just gonna give another minute, if you don't mind. And Candace, you know, right now on my screen, I see the Boston City Council Committee on Civil Rights. So while we wait, I'll just make sure that everybody looks camera ready. Make sure you clean your screens. Case, clean your screens. Yep, that's right, Tanya, you know about backdrops, the sunlight, perfect. You could tell that Tanya and I go way back. She is all about the setting. Flynn, you're ready to go. All right.
First
so
things first, do I look okay, Julia?
That's right, Flynn, because if you're not camera ready, we're not doing this, okay? It's all about the backdrops. And then the other thing too is if Neil or Christine, if we can just let Commissioner Tavares know that we'd like to get started and hopefully they can join us. I'm gonna start reading the opening comments until she arrives so that we can be super mindful of people's time. So I am going to go ahead and get started. So everyone knows that we have a bootleg gavel here. I'm gaveling us in. Good morning, everyone. I am City Councilor at Large Julia Mejia, the chair of the Committee of Civil Rights. It's Thursday, September the 10th, 2020, and we're here today for a virtual hearing on docket 0377, order for a hearing to discuss Boston's electoral recount process. The hearing order is sponsored by District 2 City Councilor Ed Flynn. The docket was referred to the committee on February the 12th, 2020. In accordance to Governor Baker's March 12, 2020 executive order modifying certain requirements of the opening meeting law and relieving public bodies of certain requirements, including the requirements that public bodies conduct its meeting in a public place that is open and physically accessible to the public. The City Council will be conducting this hearing virtually via Zoom. This enables the City Council to carry on its responsibilities while adhering to public health accommodations and ensuring public access to its deliberations through adequate alternative means. The public may watch this meeting via live stream at www.boston.gov/citycouncil-tv. It will also be rebroadcasted at a later date on Comcast 8, RCN 82, Verizon 1964. For public testimony, written comments may be sent to the committee email at cc.civilrights@boston.gov and will be made part of the record and available to all counselors. Joining us from the administration is Inette Tavares and Sabino Piemonte from the Boston Elections Department. And also participating from Mass Vote is Cheryl Crawford, Executive Director, and Tanya Tedesco, who managed and led the recount efforts for the Julia for Boston campaign. I'm also joined by my colleagues, Ed Flynn from District 2, Liz Breeden from District 9. We also have received written testimony from today's hearing from Alejandra St. Guillen. I will now turn over to the sponsors of this hearing order, Ed Flynn, for opening very brief remarks. And then I will read into the testimony, the written testimony that we received from Alejandra St. Guillen, and then we'll turn it over to Commissioner Tavares and her team. Councilor Flynn, you now have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Mejia. Thank you for chairing this important hearing, and to the panelists for being here as well. I filed this hearing order to start a discussion on how to improve the current recount process and whether there should be an automatic recount if the margin of votes is under a certain threshold. Right now, the recount process in Boston requires that candidates requesting a recount to collect 50 signatures in each ward, in that if they want to recount, which can create a barrier for candidates and a barrier to have an accurate count of the votes as well. I know that in other cities and towns, the requirement for the number of signatures are either lower or that there is a process for an automatic recount. And I want to see if we can improve our recount process here in Boston. Getting an accurate count of the vote is a critical part of our elections. We have had very close elections in the past. I think the city has the responsibility to provide an accurate count, which they do, of all the votes and we shouldn't be dependent on having the candidates getting enough signatures after an election. As we prepare for future elections, I hope that we can have a discussion on what the city can do to update its recount process and whether we can have an automatic recount if the margin is of a certain threshold. Again, I want to say thank you to the panelists for being here. Thank you to Commissioner Tavares for your work on election issues, and to the other panelists as well, Cheryl Crawford and Tanya, and want to thank City Council Central staff and my colleagues. Thank you, Councilor Mejia.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Councilor Flynn. And I just wanted to note that after a traumatic one vote win, for me, this hearing is incredibly important because it really highlighted I would say, the deep systemic barriers that a lot of candidates, particularly candidates with low resources, and candidates of color in particular, would have going forward and being able to do this. And I would be remiss if I did not say what an incredible job Tanya Tedesco did in getting us to the finish line. And we wouldn't not be here today if it wouldn't have been for the heroic efforts of that squad and the leadership that it took. And I would have to say the grits and perseverance that the entire village had to getting us there. My fingertips were literally frozen on November, the coldest night of the year, the first coldest night of the year. I remember being in, I think it was Ward 12. My fingertips were literally frozen, and we still had to collect X amount of signatures just to make sure that we had all of those signatures collected, just so that we can get permission to do the recount. And I say this because 50 signatures per ward is a lot more than you would have to do just to get on the ballot. So there's a lot that we need to uncover here to make this fair and equitable for all. And I think it's important for us to have this conversation because we need to ensure that the city also has the resources and the support so that they can also do their job. So looking forward to the conversation. I would like to, in the interest of time, because I know Commissioner Tavares, you need to leave a little bit earlier, would love for you to start with your testimony, give my colleagues an opportunity to ask questions, and then read into the record Alejandra St. Guillen's testimony before we move on to the next panelist. So I am going to turn over the mic over to Commissioner Tavares. You now have the floor.
Good morning, and thank you for holding this hearing today. As you previously mentioned, in order to trigger a recount for a municipal election, it requires that a candidate petitions the board, and because it is a citywide race, it required 50 signatures for each ward. And right now, as it stands, this would require, it's not an administrative process, it's something that's written in the charter and the legislation, so it would require legislative changes in order for us to adjust the process for how a recount is conducted in the city of Boston.
Okay, so any other comments or anything else you'd like to share? I mean, there was a big process. And
it was a huge process. It was an amazing experience. As an election commissioner, you don't really get the opportunity to oversee a citywide recount, especially in the largest municipality in the Commonwealth. So it was a pretty amazing experience, and the turnout was even more impressive. So there was a lot of efforts and a lot of resources that went into us conducting that recount. So I think administratively from our process, it went well. So however the recount is triggered in the end, I think we would follow the same process we did, but I think right now we're discussing how one would be triggered. And in order to trigger a recount, it would require just that, the signatures from 50 registered voters in each district. So that's the piece where would require the legislative changes. We can handle everything else after that, but unless the law changes to allow us to conduct it in another way, our hands are pretty much tied.
Okay, so I appreciate that. And just because I'm always changing the rules and how we do business in city government, I'm gonna do things a little bit different this time. Flynn, don't worry, I'm not gonna get us into any trouble, but I am going to open up this conversation and allow some of our panelists to also be engaged in the Q&A portion. Often it's just my colleagues, and I think that if we're really going to have a robust conversation, it really needs to include the voices of the people who are living the realities. So I'm sure Tanya Tedesco and Cheryl Crawford may have some questions or even comments that will be helpful to you, Commissioner Tavares, as you continue to go along on this journey. So Councilor Flynn, I know that time is short, but I think I'd like to open it up for questions and comments from our colleagues as well as some of the panelists that are here today. Is that okay?
Yes, that's perfect.
Okay, so I'm making it up as we go, yeah. So we'll start with you, Councilor Flynn, and then I'm gonna go over to Councilor Breeden for brief opening statements and some questions and comments. Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor. Commissioner, if we didn't have to go to the State House to seek changes, if we could do it administratively here in Boston, what would you recommend us to do in terms of an automatic recount?
I wouldn't make a recommendation in terms of what you should do. It would have to be in line with whatever the law suggests that we said. Either it's the threshold that you previously mentioned, which is how a statewide recount is triggered, is based on a certain threshold. So I would say administratively, that's probably what we would do. Other than the legislative changes, we can't recommend that administratively is conducted in any other manner.
Okay, so I guess I'm trying to ask if, if we were to send something to the State House, and we are asking for an automatic recount, is there a certain threshold that you would recommend? How many votes that separates one from two, or a percent?
Yep, I would follow the guidelines that they use now for the state's recount, which is, I believe, 1/2 of 1%.
Okay, okay, that 1/2 of 1%. And in the case of the Councilor Mejia and Sankey, and that would fall under that, in that scenario, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay, yeah, that's what I'm trying to get at, is how we can get there as a city, where we could bring something to the State House that would allow an automatic recount. So I know we'd have to work closely with government operations, but maybe I can listen to some of the panelists and get some of their recommendations as well. But I just agree with Councilor Mejia and Alejandra Sanquian. It's after an election, and after you've worked so hard and your volunteers are burnt out and the candidate is burnt out, and you really don't know if you won or lost, and then you have to start the process of raising money, and then you have to start the process of gathering signatures, getting volunteers, going out, getting them certified, bringing them back in. That's a very difficult process, especially, you're heading into mid-November and it's cold out, as Councilor Mejia mentioned. I just want to make it easier for a candidate to go out and have an accurate count without going through that cumbersome process.
Well,
So maybe.
Sorry, go ahead. I was gonna say that would eliminate one step in the process for us, having to certify all of those signatures, because once they're turned in, then our staff here, who have also been drained from having to conduct a election, are now having to certify all these signatures.
Okay, no, that makes sense. Thank you, Commissioner. Councilor Mejia, I don't have any further questions.
Okay, great. Thank you, Councilor Flynn. I'm going to now ask Councilor Breeden. You now have the floor if you are interested in making brief opening remarks and then providing some questions or comments. That would be great.
Thank you very much, Councillor Mejia. Thank you, Councillor Flynn, for bringing this very important subject up for discussion today in our hearing. It really seems that the barriers to conduct a recount are pretty onerous on candidates in the city of Boston. And I would really like to see us go to the statewide threshold of an automatic recount within 1/2 of 1% of 1/2 of 1%, which was just mentioned. So I don't have any questions at this moment. I look forward to perhaps finding a logical and easy, not that anything's easy, but a logical step that we can take to amend this situation without too many obstacles. So thank you so much for hearing that. I look forward to the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, Councilor Breeden. I believe that we've also been joined by at-large Councilor Asabi George. You now have the floor.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you everyone who's here this morning. I look forward to the discussion. I think that discussing and exploring the automatic recount is certainly, I think, the direction that we should be heading in for the city of Boston, but appreciate everyone's attendance and attention to this matter and look forward to the discussion ahead. Thanks, Madam Chair, and thank you to the maker, Councilor Flynn.
Thank you, Councilor Asabi George. Commissioner, I was about to promote you, Commissioner, give you the councilor title, but I would love to create an opportunity for us to have a conversation. And I think that those who were behind the scenes doing the work are a really crucial part in terms of helping to inform the process somewhat. So I'd love to create an opportunity. I know, Tanya, you're coming in as a panelist, but while we have Commissioner Tavares here, would love an opportunity to give you the floor to, share any thoughts or questions that you may have about the process before we dive into your testimony?
I think it's just what I said previously. I think eliminating the signature piece, I think would alleviate a step in the process for us, because again, once those signatures are certified, it's just like you're originally running for office. We still have to go over each signature one by one and make sure it matches in our database in order to be able to certify it. So that would be one step in the process that we would just be able to eliminate altogether.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm gonna have Tanya Tedesco just offer some questions if you don't mind. And having gone through the process, Tanya, I'm just curious if you had any questions or recommendations for Commissioner Tavares, because I know we're gonna lose her in a little bit. So I just wanted to seize this moment while you're here. Tanya?
Yeah, I think the Election Commission did an amazing job given the circumstances. The one question I do have is, you talked about the threshold being a legislative issue. Is the number of signatures, because the burden is higher for us than statewide and federal. I have some friends that did congressional races, and I believe that the threshold for them was 250 from anywhere in the district. And so I'm wondering if the signature requirement is also a legislative issue that has to be fixed, or if that, even if we can't fix the recount threshold faster, if the city has the ability, I can't believe we have to ask the state for permission, but that's a whole separate issue. Do you understand my question?
Yeah, no, we didn't set that threshold. I believe that's how it's written in the charter as well. So that would still have to be a legislative change.
Yeah, for me, the issues are not around how the commission managed the recount. It's structural problems.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you for that. And I'm wondering if anyone else had any questions specifically for Commissioner Tavares that we can bring into the floor. I would like to say that Commissioner Tavares, I was really impressed with how what an amazing job your team did at getting us through the whole entire process. Like whenever we had a question about signatures or how many, and we were clear on that, but there were some things that were sometimes a little bit fuzzy for us. Your team was always really quick to respond to our questions. We were able to get those signatures certified in a timely manner. So we actually ended up delivering more signatures than we needed, just in case, because there might have been a few here that were off. But and then just the whole entire process from beginning to end, counting. I think one of the things that, and I know we're talking specifically just about signatures, but I also am just curious about the staffing and the manpower during the recounts. Councilor Flynn, I'm not sure if that is part of, if you're wanting to talk a little bit about that, but I would like to make an observation that it took a lot of staffing to accommodate a 3-day recount. And so I'm just curious, Commissioner Tavares, if you could just talk a little bit about just the manpower that it took during those 3 days to get the operation up and running, and then just what are some of the things some lessons that you've learned from that you would like to, in the event, God forbid, this were to happen again, and considering the state of affairs, we should be prepared for anything at this point. What would you say are some of the things that you may recommend that we do differently in terms of staffing and finances, if you need more money to help support these 3-day recounts? And just talk to us a little bit about what it is that you would need to do this effectively.
I would say all in all, the recount went extremely, extremely well. I think typically most people or most municipalities will use a large space such as the gym to conduct a recount. However, we were fortunate enough to find space here within the building that allowed for us to keep all of our ballots secured. We didn't have to transport it someplace else and then transport things back and forth. So we really sat down and thought about this process and how it was going to look before we executed, because that was a big concern for us, was having to remove ballots out of City Hall. And then if we weren't done with a recount within that day or two, where would we then secure those ballots? Would we then have to transport them back? to City Hall and things of that nature. And I think our ability to keep it here at City Hall worked really, really well. We have a tremendous amount of poll workers. Our poll workers are great. We were able to bring a lot of them in because these were individuals that were very familiar with the process of counting ballots. And that's who we used along with our staff to come in and help count the ballots, which made for a very efficient process.
Mhm. Yeah, I would agree. I do have another question in terms of, there were times when, in terms of like, were you able to provide a full training for people to help decipher the ballots? Did you work on
We
that?
had them come in advance and we went over everything with our accounting team, our readers and our recorders. So we had them come in about an hour early and we gave them an overview of what the date was going to look like and what to look for.
Thank you, thank you. I'm going to, before you, Commissioner Tavares, I know you're short on time, but I'd love to open up the floor and have Tanya do her opening testimony remarks. And then before you leave, if you have any reflections that you'd like to share, that would be great. So I'd like to pass over the floor back to Tanya.
Can I ask a question first?
Absolutely.
So this is for Commissioner Tavares. The securing of the ballots was overseen by the BPD. And I'm wondering, and I'm not expecting an answer, but I'm assuming, watching that whole process, that component of it was extremely expensive for the city. And I'm wondering if it needs to be the BPD, or if poll workers or other staff or other people can do that, or if it's like a security risk that people are going to literally run off with ballots. And I'm not being facetious. I'm just curious as to why the BPD supervising and so many versus election staff and poll workers.
We use a variety of people, but having BPD right on site the night of the election, when we realized that the margin was so close, we had a detail placed outside of the vault. And I think it just helped to assure people that we were, taking this very seriously and that nothing had been tampered with, no one had been in that vault and had access to those ballots. I don't think there's no requirement that it is a police officer, but I think having the officer there just ensured that we had a very secure process. We can, in the, if it's a security thing, we can in the future look to have our maybe municipal services officers who also helped in the process of bringing ballots back and forth. And typically we do use our police officers to help maintain chain of custody. Even on election day, they're the ones who are responsible for transporting all of our ballots to the precincts, and they're the ones who are responsible for bringing them back to City Hall. So at the moment, it made more sense to have the police officer secure our vault as well.
I was more wondering the 3 days of the recounts. It felt like, and maybe they were municipal officers and I couldn't differentiate because I was tired. There was at every cross point, there was an officer. And many of us were just observing how expensive that component of it, on top of everything else, must have been for the city.
Yeah, for the recount, we used a combination. I believe we had 2 Boston police officers and the rest of the officers were municipal protective service officers.
Yeah, thank you. I love how fiscally responsible Tanya is being, and I really do appreciate those questions. But Tanya, I would love to give you an opportunity to share your remarks, and that so my colleagues and I can ask some questions.
Sure. Councilor Flynn, I appreciate this, the opportunity to speak at this hearing. I appreciate that the hearing is happening. The recount was, as Councilor Mejia has said, traumatic and exhausting, especially for and I'm sure Alejandra St. Guillen's team would feel the same way, because we were both challengers, especially for challengers that had already utilized and exhausted our networks, our resources, our time, the burden, well, the not knowing at first on election night, but the burden of the recount, I am not sure that we can adequately convey how exhausting that was and how stressful that was. And the fact that the burden is higher for municipal recounts than congressional seems concerning or weird. For me, one of the main concerns is not just the number, but that every district, every precinct and ward, every ward has to be represented, especially given how segregated Boston is. There's not a lot of networking built in for a lot of people, and especially for candidates such as Julia, where we had to make inroads in communities that were unfamiliar with her, to find volunteers in every single ward was possible because of the network we had built, but it was, certain wards were harder just because we don't know as many people across the city. So the main two things, and the fact that it has to go to the state makes it much harder, but the threshold to match the statewide and to put the number of signatures in line with what either statewide or federal candidates have to do seems like it removes the burden from the candidates and their campaigns in a pretty significant way. To reduce it down to 250 from anywhere in the city would have taken us a half a day instead of days and days. And we were verifying signatures on our own. And I felt terrible for the commission when we walked in behind Alejandra's team. They threw down 2,000 signatures, and then we threw down 2,000 signatures. Like they had already counted, they'd already been running the ballots. So if each candidate only had to bring in, say, 350 to ensure that there's no erroneous signatures, I assume that would only take a few people at the commissioner's office a few hours versus what had to have taken days. The actual process of the recount, I mean, there's issues in that, but I don't know that there's an easy solution to make it less burdensome on candidates. But as far as the recount, those are the two things. And I know that Councilor Edwards is already looking at revising the charter for some other issues. And if this is a charter issue, then maybe we just redo the entire charter. Let's start over. That's all. And thank you all. And I just want to give a shout out to Sabino because he was amazing.
Yes. Power to Sabino. He has been incredibly generous with his time from the moment we even decided to run. So you have an amazing team, Commissioner Tavares, and you should feel very proud of, I know you had just started in your role, and to have this be your first big thing to do as a commissioner, I just want to just give you like amazing props. And I want to also thank the administration for making sure that you show that you were able to participate in today's hearing, because what I believe is that public hearings create an opportunity for people to who have diverse experiences and beliefs to really come together and get to the bottom of an issue and work collectively so that everybody can walk away feeling heard. And more importantly, what we hear here helps inform how we can better support our constituents and our city employees. So with that, I'm just gonna read Alejandra St. Guillen's testimony, and then I'm gonna ask my colleagues if they have questions for Tanya before we move on. I just wanna make sure that Commissioner Tavares, you're here to hear Alejandra St. Guillen's testimony, okay? So this testimony is written by Alejandra St. Guillen. It says, "Dear Councilor Flynn, Chairwoman Councilor Mejia, and honorable members of the Boston City Council. Thank you for the opportunity to provide testimony on docket 0377 in order for a hearing to discuss Boston's electoral recount process. Having most recently experienced the recount process alongside Councilor Mejia, I fully appreciate the necessity to establish a more efficient recount process for municipal elections. As all of you know, campaigning is both a grueling and very expensive process. I had been on the campaign trail for 11 months when the general election took place. Every candidate is prepared to either be victorious or not on election night. What we were not prepared for is to launch another campaign immediately following the election. Aside from the deep emotional toll it takes on someone who has already sacrificed so much of their in pursuit of the elected office, it's also an extremely confusing time as one does not generally prepare ahead of time for a recount. Although little can be done to impact the emotional element, a clear and transparent process does alleviate some of the stress on both candidates and their dedicated team of staff and volunteers. Therefore, I fully support the implementation of an automatic recount should the vote tallies fall within a certain percentage point. On election night, I was down by 10 votes and ended up conceding once the recount had us separated by just 1 vote. Therefore, I have a great confidence in our electoral process in the city of Boston, meaning that the vote margin to automatically initiate a recount process does not have to be extremely large. However, taking the burden from the candidates to collect thousands of signatures is beneficial to both of them and our democracy. With an automatic recount, the process can happen much sooner after the general election, which is a benefit for many reasons. First, candidates can spend that time recruiting recount volunteers and preparing for the actual recount instead of focusing on signature collection. Should a candidate decide to engage in a court process prior to conceding, they can do so without significantly delaying the transition process. Lastly, it would allow more time for transition period for the ultimate victor. This is particularly important for newly elected officials who need time to build their staff and transition for their current roles, if applicable. In the past decade, we have seen a huge shift on the Boston City Council, with open seats at both the mayoral and city council level, incumbent challengers, and more engaged electorate. Our democracy has been more engaged, more energized, and we are likely to see that continue in the future. The talent bench within the city of Boston is deep, which makes the chances of close elections even more inevitable. I do not think the 2019 city councilor at large election was a fluke, but an indicator of what is to come in future years. Therefore, it is incumbent upon the city to prepare for these close races in a manner that is fair and equitable to the candidates and the voters. Thank you again for the opportunity to provide this testimony. And with that, I'd like to ensure that we acknowledge that it was definitely a close race, and it was down to the wire. And I think it was also an opportunity to help people understand how important their vote is and why every vote mattered. And going through this process was a teachable moment in many ways. And I think it really was a lesson for all of us to learn. And my hope is that as we continue to move forward, we, because it's gonna happen again, I'm sorry to say, we just have to be prepared for it in a way that is going to benefit and support the process. And I would be remiss if I didn't give a big shout out to all of our volunteers on both camps who dedicated their time and energy to collect signatures and then spend 3 days on the floor recounting. A big shout out to everyone who did that. Before we move on and lose Commissioner Tavares, just wanted to know if you had any closing remarks, questions, or comments that you'd like to note.
I just want to thank both you and Councilor Flynn for holding this hearing, and I look forward to what the future process of us conducting a recount looks like. So thank you both for the opportunity.
Do you have any questions for Tanya?
No, I don't think I have any questions at the moment. Thank you.
I'm on non-traditional. I'm supposed to be deferred to my colleagues, but I know you have to leave soon, so I just want to make sure that you knew that. So I'm going to open up the floor for questions. Councilor Flynn, any questions for Tanya?
No, I don't have any questions for Tanya. I know Commissioner Tavares is leaving. And so I just want to say thank you to the commissioner and her dedicated team, employees at the election department. Thank you for being here. Looking forward to working with you. And I think what we want to try to do is make it easier for future candidates, but also for the election department itself in streamlining the process. Because as Councilor Mejia mentioned, this is going to happen again, whether it happens next year or it happens in 5 years, the likelihood will be that it will take place. And we just want to try to be proactive and come up with a recommendation or some plans on how we can improve it. Thank you, Commissioner.
Councilor Breeden, you now have the floor. If you have any questions, comments?
I don't have any questions. I think the next step really is to explore how we can go to an automatic recount. And I think that maybe lives in the charter, and hopefully in the process that Councillor Edwards is leading, that we can discuss that possibility in relation to renewing or changing the charter. So thank you so much. And thank you for all the people who are participating this morning. And thank you, Commissioner Tavares. Thank you.
Councillor Sabi George, do you have any questions for Tanya or the commissioner?
I don't have any questions. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. And I'm not sure if we've been joined by Cheryl Crawford. Okay.
We have not, Counselor.
Okay. All right. So I am not one to hold anyone hostage for the sake of holding people hostage. I think that is brutally unfair. I would love to, Councillor Flynn, as the sponsor of this particular hearing, I just wanted to personally thank you for bringing it to the forefront and giving us an opportunity to hear this matter. And I would love to see if anyone else has any closing remarks. I don't see Cheryl Crawford here, so not sure if she's going to be able to join us. And I was warned this is going to be, no matter how traumatic it was, I was warned that this is going to be a short hearing. So I wanted to just honor the time that we have together. And Councillor Flynn, and just curious if you wanted to end with some closing remarks and give our panelists an opportunity to do so.
Yes, thank you, Councilor Mejia. Again, I want to say thank you to the panelists. Thank you to Councilor Mejia and to Tanya and to the Commissioner and to Alejandra Sanquian for her testimony as well. And as Councilor Breeden mentioned, maybe we should call for a working session, maybe a recommendation to have a working session and talk to Councilor Edwards about her recommendation on how we can move forward on seeing how we can either approach legislative leaders or continue to get more testimony on some of the obstacles we might have going forward. But I think the next step would probably to have a working session and to discuss this in further detail. So thank you, Councilor Mejia, for your leadership on this important issue.
Thank you. Thank you. I've just been advised that we have been joined by Maria Perel. And she's in there, and I see that you want me to call on her. So I'm calling on you, Maria. You now have the floor.
Good morning, Counselor.
Good morning.
I just wanted to join and hear. I know it was a brutal campaign. I saw, I learned too what the process was, as I didn't know. So it was, it's definitely something I'm excited that you've brought forward to make some change. And I'm interested in supporting any way I can. Just like to learn a little bit more about the process. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you for joining us. I would like to have an opportunity for Tanya for any closing remarks that you may have.
I don't think so. I will let everyone go. I don't need to keep you.
And if anyone knows me, you know that I'm about leading with the people who are living the realities. And I don't know who lived this reality more than Tanya. So in many ways, Tanya, whatever comes out of this, it should be named after you. Tanya's Law, just because you literally lived this, and it's just, I'm incredibly grateful to you and everything that you did to get us here. So thank you. And so I think, Councillor Flynn, at this point, I am going to end. I just would like to thank all of those who joined us for this very important, I think this is the shortest hearing in the history of my tenure here, but it's the most important one, just to make that known on the record that this is the one that I've been waiting for. And so really looking forward to, I think it's a great recommendation to turn this into a working session to follow up with Councillor Edwards so that we can really revisit the city charter and change the system so that it's easier for folks. Maria, I just want to say thank you so much for joining us. It was great to have you here. And I think at this point, I'm going to, let me just go back and read my script, making sure that I didn't forget any legalities as I gavel us away from this hearing. So thank you to my colleagues for participating in the Q&A portion. It doesn't seem like we have anyone waiting in the public testimony. And I would like to move into closing remarks, which we've already heard from. And I think we're now, so we are going to say that this hearing is adjourned. Thank you so much. Gabbling us out.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye, y'all. Okay, we could stop recording. We're done. Thank you. Maria, it's so good to see you. Bye, everybody.